Hello, lovely people. So, this is the last chapter I'm going to read from Max Heindel's Rosicrucian Cosmo Conception. And this is chapter 17, the method of acquiring first-hand knowledge. The first steps. The time has come for pointing out the way by which each individual may investigate for himself all the facts which we have dealt thus far in our study, and stated in the beginning that there are no special gifts bestowed upon any. All may know for themselves the truth concerning the pilgrimage of the soul, our past evolution and future destiny of the world, without being compelled to depend upon the veracity of another. There is a method whereby this valuable faculty may be acquired, and the earnest student qualify himself to investigate those superphysical realms, a method by which, if persistently followed, the powers of a god may be developed. A simple illustration may indicate the first steps. The very best mechanic is well nigh helpless without the tools of his craft. Indeed, it's the hallmark of a good artisan that he is fastidious as to the quality and condition of the tools he uses, because he knows that the work depends as much upon their excellence as upon his skill. The ego has several instruments: a dense body, a vital body, a desire body, and a mind. These are its tools, and upon their quality and condition depends how much or how little it can accomplish in its work of gathering experience in each life. If the instruments are poor and dull, there will be but little spiritual growth, and the life will be a barren one, so far as the spirit is concerned. We generally estimate a successful life by the bank account, the social position attained, or the happiness resulting from a carefree existence and a sheltered environment. When life is regarded in that way, all the principal things that make for permanency are forgotten. The individual is blinded by the evanescent and illusionary. A bank account seems a very real success. The fact is forgotten that from the moment the ego leaves the body, it has no equity in gold or any other earthly treasure. It may even have to answer for the methods employed in amassing that hoard, and suffer great pain in seeing others spend it. It's forgotten that the important social position also disappears when the silver cord is loosed. Those who once fawned may then sneer, and even those who were faithful in life might shudder at the thought of an hour spent with no company but that of the dead. All that is of this life alone is vanity. Think Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. Only that is of true value, which can be taken with us across the threshold, is the treasure of the spirit. The hothouse plant may look very beautiful as it blooms in its sheltered glass house, but should the furnace fire go out, it would wither and die, while the plant that has grown in rain and sunshine, through storm and calm, will survive the winter and bloom afresh each year. From the viewpoint of the soul, happiness and a sheltered environment are generally unfortunate circumstances. The petted and fondled lapdog is subject to diseases of which the homeless cur, which has to fight for a scrap from a garbage can, knows nothing. The cur's life is hard, but it gets experience that makes it alert, alive, and resourceful. Its life is rich in events, and it reaps a harvest of experience, while the pampered lapdog drones its time away in fearful monotony. The case of a human being is somewhat similar. It may be hard to fight poverty and hunger, but from the standpoint of the soul, it's infinitely preferable to a life of idle luxury. Where wealth is nothing more than a handmaid of well thought out philanthropy, which helps man in such a way as to really uplift him, It may be a very great blessing and a means of growth for its possessor, but when used for selfish purposes and oppression, it can't be regarded as anything other than an unmitigated curse. The soul is here to acquire experience through its instruments. These are the tools furnished to each at birth, and they are good, bad, or indifferent according to what we've learned through past experience in the building of them. Such as they are, we must work with them, if at all. If we've become aroused from the usual lethargy and are anxious to progress, the question naturally arises, what must I do? Without well-kept tools, the mechanic can do no effective work, and similarly, the instruments of the ego must be cleansed and sharpened. Then we may commence work to some purpose. As one works with these wonderful tools, they themselves improve their proper use and become more and more efficient to aid in the work. The object of this work is union with the higher self. There are 3 steps by which this work conquers the lower nature, but they're not completely taken one after the other. In a certain sense they go together, so that at the present stage the first receives the most attention, the second less, and the third least of all. In time, when the first step has been wholly taken, naturally more attention can be paid to the other 2. There are 3 helps given in attaining these 3 stages. They can be seen in the outside world, where the great leaders of humanity have placed them. The first help is race religions, which, by aiding humanity to overcome the desire body, prepare it for union with the Holy Spirit. The full operation of this help was seen on the day of Pentecost. As the Holy Spirit is the race god, all languages are expressions of it. And that's why the apostles, when fully united and filled with the Holy Spirit, spoke with different tongues and were able to convince their hearers. Their desire bodies had been sufficiently purified to bring about the wished-for union, and this is an earnest of what the disciple will one day attain to, the power to speak all tongues. It may also be cited as a modern historical example that the Count de Saint-Germain, who was one of the later incarnations of Christian Rosicrucian, the founder of our secret order, spoke all languages, so that all to whom he spoke thought he belonged to the same nation as they. He also had achieved union with the Holy Spirit. In the Hyperborean epoch, before man possessed a desire body, there was but one universal mode of communication, and when the desire body has become sufficiently purified, all men will again be able to understand one another, for then the separative race differentiation will have passed away. The second help which humanity now has is the religion of the Son, the Christian religion, the object of which is union with Christ by purification and control of the vital body. Paul refers to this future state when he says, "Until Christ be formed in you," and exhorts his followers, as men who are running a race, to rid themselves of every weight. The fundamental principle in building the vital body is repetition. Repeated experiences work on it to create memory. The leaders of humanity, who desired to give us unconscious help by certain exercises, instituted prayer as a means of bringing pure and lofty thought to work on the vital body, and enjoined us to pray without ceasing. Scoffers have often sneered, why should it be necessary to always pray? Because if God is omniscient, he knows our needs, and if he's not, our prayers will probably never reach him. And if he's not omniscient, he can't be omnipotent, and therefore couldn't answer our prayers in any case. Many an earnest Christian may also have thought it wrong to be continually importuning the throne of grace. But such ideas are founded upon a misunderstanding of facts. Truly God is omniscient and requires no reminder of our needs, but if we pray aright, we lift ourselves up to him, thus working upon and purifying our vital bodies. If we pray aright. But that is the great trouble. We're generally more concerned about temporal things than we are about spiritual upliftment. Churches will hold special meetings to pray for rain, and the chaplains of opposing armies or navies will even pray before a battle that success may follow their arms. But that is a prayer to the race god, who fights the battles of his people, gives them increase of flocks and herds, fills their granaries, and caters to material wants. Such prayers are not even purifying. They are from the desire body, which sums up the situation thus: Now, Lord, I am keeping your commandments to the best of my ability, and I want you to do your part in return. Christ gave to humanity a prayer that is, like himself, unique and all-embracing. In it there are 7 distinct and separate prayers, one for each of the 7 principles of man: the threefold body, the threefold spirit, and the link of mind. Each prayer is peculiarly adapted to promote the progression of that part of composite man to which it refers. The purpose of the prayer relating to the threefold body is the spiritualization of those vehicles and the extraction therefrom from the threefold soul. The prayers relating to the threefold spirit prepare it to receive the extracted essence, the threefold soul. The prayer for the link of mind is to keep it in its proper relation as a tie between the higher and lower nature. The third help to be given to humanity will be the religion of the Father. We can have very little conception of what that will be, save that the ideal will be even higher than the brotherhood, and that by it the dense body will be spiritualized. The religions of the Holy Spirit, the race religions, were for the uplifting of the human race through a feeling of kinship limited to a group, family, tribe, or nation. The purpose of the religion of the Son, S-O-N, Christ, is to further uplift mankind by forming it into a universal brotherhood of separate individuals. The ideal of the religion of the Father will be the elimination of all separateness, merging all into one, so that there will be no I nor thou, but all will be one in reality. This will not come to pass while we're still inhabitants of the physical earth, but in a future state where we shall realise our unity with all, each having access to all the future states, where we shall future knowledge garnered by each separate individual. I'll read that again. This will not come to pass while we are still inhabitants of the physical earth, but in a future state where we shall realise our unity with all, each having access to all the knowledge garnered by each separate individual. Just as a single facet of a diamond has access to all the light that comes through each of the other's facets, it's one with them, yet bounded by lines which give it a certain individuality, but without separateness. So will the individual spirit retain the memory of its particular experiences while giving to all others the fruits of its individual existence. These are the steps and stages through which humanity is unconsciously being led. In past ages, the race spirit reigned alone. Man was content with a patriarchal and paternal government in which he played no part. Now, all over the world, we see signs of the breaking down of the old system. The caste system, which was the stronghold of England in India, is crumbling. Instead of being separated into small groups, the people are uniting in the demand that the oppressor shall depart and leave them to live in freedom under a government of, by and for the people. I don't see that anywhere in the world has that yet. Russia is torn by strife for freedom from a dictatorial and autocratic government. Turkey has awakened and taken a long stride forwards towards liberty. Here, in our own land, where we are supposed to be in the actual enjoyment of such liberty as others are, as yet, unable to covet or fight for, we're not yet satisfied. We're learning that there are other oppressions than those of an autocratic monarchy. We see that we still have industrial freedom to gain. We are chafing under the yoke of the trusts and an insane system of competition. We're trending towards cooperation, which is now practiced by the trusts within their own confines for private profit. We are desirous of a state of society where they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. Thus, all over the world, the old systems of paternal government are changing. Nations as such have had their day, and are unwittingly working towards universal brotherhood in accordance with the design of our invisible leaders, who are none the less potent in shaping events because they are not officially seated in the councils of nations. These are the slow means by which the different bodies of humanity at large are being purified. But the aspirant to the higher knowledge works consciously to attain those ends by well-defined methods according to his constitution. Western methods for Western people. In India, certain methods under different systems of yoga are used. Yoga means union, and is in the West the object of the aspirant. And as in the West, the object of the aspirant is union with the higher self. But to be efficacious, the method of seeking that union must differ. The vehicles of a Hindu are very differently constituted from those of a Caucasian. The Hindus have lived for many thousands of years in an environment and climate totally different from ours. They have pursued a different method of thought, and their civilization, though of a very high order, is different from ours in its effects. Therefore, it would be useless for us to adopt their methods, which are the outcome of the highest occult knowledge and perfectly suited to them, but as unsuitable for the people of the West as a diet of oats would be for a lion. For instance, in some systems it's required that the yogi shall sit in certain positions, that particular cosmic currents may flow through his body in a certain way to produce certain definite results. That instruction would be altogether useless for a Caucasian, as he is absolutely impervious to those currents because of his way of living. If he is to attain results at all, he must work in harmony with the constitution of his vehicles. That is why the mysteries were established in different parts of Europe during the Middle Ages. The alchemists were deep students of the higher occult science. The popular belief that the object of their study and experimenting was the transmutation of baser metals into gold was because they chose that symbolic way of describing their true work, which was the transmutation of the lower nature into spirit. It was thus described to lull the suspicions of the priests without stating a falsehood. The statement that the Rosicrucians were a society devoted to the discovery and use of the formula for the making of the Philosopher's Stone was and is true. It's also true that most people have handled and do often handle this wondrous stone. It's common, but of no avail to any but the individual who makes it for himself. The formula is given in the esoteric training, and a Rosicrucian is no different in that respect from the occultist of any other school. All are engaged in the making of this coveted stone, and each, however, using his own methods, as there are no two individuals alike, and consequently, really effective work is always individual in its scope. All occult schools are divisible into 7, as are the rays of life, the virgin spirits. Each school or order belongs to one of these 7 rays and does each unit of our humanity. Therefore, any individual seeking to unite with one of these occult groups, the brothers, in which do not belong to his ray, cannot do so with benefit to himself. The members of these groups are brothers in a more intimate sense than are the rest of humanity. Perhaps if these 7 rays are compared to the 7 colours of the spectrum, their relation to one another can be better understood. For instance, if a red ray were to ally itself with a green ray, inharmony would result. The same principle applies to spirits. Each must proceed with the group to which it belongs during manifestation, yet they are all one. As all the colours are contained in the white light, but the refractive quality of our atmosphere seems to divide it into 7 colours, so the illusory conditions of concrete existence cause the virgin spirits to seem grouped, and this apparent grouping will abide while we are in this state. The Rosicrucian order was started particularly for those whose high degree of intellectual development caused them to repudiate the heart. Intellect imperiously demands a logical explanation of everything, the world mystery, the questions of life and death, the reasons for and the modus operandi of existence were not explained by the priestly injunction not to seek to know the mysteries of God. To any man or woman who is blessed, or otherwise, with such an inquiring mind, it's of paramount importance that they shall receive all the information they crave, so that when the head is stilled, the heart may speak. Intellectual knowledge is but a means to an end, not the end itself. Therefore, the Rosicrucian purposes first of all to satisfy the aspirant for knowledge that everything in the universe is reasonable, and thus winning over the rebellious intellect. When it's ceased to criticise and is ready to accept provisionally, as probably true, statements which cannot be immediately verified, then, and not until then, will esoteric training be effective in developing the higher faculties, whereby man passes from faith to first-hand knowledge. Yet even then it will be found that as the pupil progresses in first-hand knowledge and becomes able to investigate for himself, there are always truths ahead of him that he knows to be truths, but which he is not yet advanced sufficiently to investigate. The pupil will do well to remember that nothing that is not logical can exist in the universe, and that logic is the surest guide in all the worlds. But he must not forget that his faculties are limited, and that more than his own powers of logical reasoning may be needed to solve a given problem, although it may nevertheless be susceptible of full explanation, but by lines of reasoning which are beyond the capacity of the pupil at that stage of his development. Another point that must be borne in mind is that unwavering confidence in the teacher is absolutely necessary. The foregoing is recommended to the particular consideration of all who intend taking the first steps towards higher knowledge. If the directions given are followed at all, they must be given full credence as an efficacious means to accomplish their purpose. To follow them in a half-hearted manner would be of no avail whatsoever. Unbelief will kill the fairest flower ever produced by spirit. Work on the different bodies of man is carried on synchronously. One body cannot be influenced without affecting the others, but the principal work may be done on any one of them. If strict attention is paid to hygiene and diet, the dense body is the one principally affected. But at the same time, there's also an effect on the vital body and the desire body, for as purer and better materials are built into the dense body, the particles are enveloped in purer planetary ether and desire stuff also, and therefore the planetary parts of the vital and desire bodies become purer. If attention is paid to food and hygiene only, the personal, vital and desire bodies may remain almost as impure as before, but it has become just a little easier to get into touch with the good than in literary and artistic tastes. The vital body will produce an effect of daintiness and fastidiousness in physical matters, and will also engender ennobling feelings and emotions in the desire body. Seeking to cultivate the emotions also reacts upon the other vehicles and helps to improve them. The next section deals with the science of nutrition. I'm not going to read that because we've moved on quite a bit, I think, in the last 100 years on nutrition. I'm just going to move on to a next section called the Lord's Prayer. Returning to our consideration of the spiritual aids to human progress, the Lord's Prayer, which may be considered as an abstract algebraical formula for the upliftment and purification of all the vehicles of man, the idea of taking proper care of the dense body is expressed in the words, "Give us this day our daily bread." The prayer dealing with the needs of the vital body is, "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us." The vital body is the seat of memory. In it are stored the subconscious records of all the past events of our life, good or ill, including all injuries inflicted or sustained, and benefits received or bestowed. We remember that the record of the life is taken from those pictures immediately after leaving the dense body at death, and that all the sufferings of post-mortem existence are the results of the events these pictures portray. If by continual prayer we obtain forgiveness for the injuries we've inflicted upon others, and if we make all the restitution possible, purify our vital bodies by forgiving those who wronged us, and eliminate all ill feeling, we save ourselves much post-mortem misery. And besides, we prepare the way for the universal brotherhood, which is particularly dependent upon the victory of the vital body over the desire body. In the form of memory, the desire body impresses upon the vital body the idea of revenge. An even temper amid the various annoyances of daily life indicates such a victory, and therefore the aspirant should cultivate control of temper, as it includes work on both bodies. The Lord's Prayer includes this also, for when we see that we are injuring others, we look about and try to find the cause. Loss of temper is one of the causes, and it originates in the desire body. Most people leave physical life with the same temperament they bring into it, but the aspirant must systematically conquer all attempts of the desire body to assume mastery. That can be done by concentration upon high ideals, which strengthens the vital body, and is much more efficacious than the common prayers of the Church. The occult scientist uses concentration in preference to prayer, because the former is accomplished by the aid of the mind, which is cold and unfeeling, whereas prayer is usually dictated by emotion. Where it is dictated by a pure, unselfish devotion to high ideals, prayer is much higher than cold concentration. It can never be cold, but bears upon the pinions of love the outpourings of the mystic to the deity. The prayer for the desire body is "Lead us not into temptation." Desire is the great tempter of mankind. It's the great incentive to all action. And in so far as the actions subserve the purposes of the spirit, it's good. But where the desire is for something degrading, something that debases the nature, it's indeed meet that we pray not to be led into temptation. Love, wealth, power and fame. These are the four great motives of human action. Desire for one or more of these is the motive for all that man does or leaves undone. The great leaders of humanity have wisely given them as incentives to action, that man may gain experience and learn thereby. They are necessary, and the aspirant may safely continue to use them as motives for action, but he must transmute them into something higher. He must overcome with nobler aspirations the selfish love which seeks the ownership of another body, and all desires for wealth, power, and fame, for narrow and personal reasons. The love for which he must long is that only which is of the soul, and embraces all beings, high and low, increasing in proportion to the needs of the recipient. The wealth which consists solely of abundance and of opportunities to serve his fellow men. The power, that alone which makes for the upliftment of humanity. The fame, none save that which increases his ability to spread the good news, that all who suffer may thus quickly find solace from their heart's grief. The prayer for the mind is, "Deliver us from evil." We've seen that mind is the link between the higher and lower natures. Animals are permitted to follow desire without any restriction whatsoever. In their case there is neither good nor evil, because they lack mind, the faculty of discrimination. The method of self-protection which we pursue in regard to animals, which kill and steal, is different from that which we use in relation to human beings who do the same things. Even a human being who is bereft of mind is not held accountable. The fact is recognised that he doesn't know what he's doing, and therefore he's simply restrained. It was only when his mental eyes were opened that man came to know good and evil. When the link of mind becomes allied to the higher self and does its bidding, we have the high-minded person. On the contrary, the coalition of the mind with the lower desire produces the low-minded person, and therefore the meaning of this prayer is that we may be delivered from the experience resulting from the alliance of the mind with the desire body and all thereby implied. The aspirant to the higher life accomplishes the union of the higher and lower natures by means of meditations on lofty subjects. This union is further cemented by contemplation, and both these states are transcended by adoration, which lifts the spirit to the very throne. The Lord's Prayer, given for the general use of the Church, gives adoration first place in order to reach the spiritual exaltation necessary to proffer a petition representing the lower needs of the needs of the lower vehicles. Each aspect of the threefold spirit, commencing with the lowest, raises itself in adoration to its corresponding aspect of deity. When the three aspects of the spirit are all arrayed before the throne of grace, each utters the prayer appropriate to the needs of its material counterpart, all three joining in the closing prayer for the mind. The human spirit soars to its counterpart, the Holy Spirit, Jehovah, saying, "Hallowed be thy name." The life spirit bows before its counterpart, the Son, Christ, saying, "Thy kingdom come." The divine spirit kneels before its counterpart, the Father, with the prayer, "Thy will be done." Then the highest, the divine spirit, petitions the highest aspect of the deity, the Father, for its counterpart, the dense body. "Give us this day our daily bread." The next highest, the life spirit, prays to its counterpart, the Son, for its counterpart to the lower nature, which is the vital body. "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us." The lowest aspect of the spirit, the human spirit, next offers its petition to the lowest aspect of deity for the highest of the threefold bodies, the desire body. "Lead us not into temptation." And lastly, in unison, All three aspects of the threefold spirit in man join in the most important of the prayers, the petition for the mind in the words, "Deliver us from evil." The introduction, "Our Father who art in heaven," is merely as the address on an envelope. The addition, "For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever, Amen," was not given by Christ, but is very appropriate as the parting adoration of the threefold spirit, as it closes its direct address to the deity. The pituitary body and the pineal gland. In the brain, and in approximately the positions shown in diagram 17 of this book, are two small organs called the pituitary body and the pineal gland. Medical science knows but little about these or the other ductless glands of the body. It calls the pineal gland the atrophied third eye, yet neither it nor the pituitary body are atrophying. This is very perplexing to scientists, for nature retains nothing useless. All over the body we find organs which are either atrophying or developing, the former being milestones, as it were, along the path which man has travelled to reach his present stage of development, the latter pointing out the lines for future improvement and development. For instance, the muscles which animals use to move the ears are present in man also, but as they are atrophying, few people can use them. The heart belongs to the class indicating future development, as already shown. It's becoming a voluntary muscle. The pituitary body and the pineal gland belong to still another class of organs, which at the present time are neither evolving nor degenerating, but are dormant. In the far past, where man was in touch with the inner worlds, these organs were his means of ingress thereto, and they will again serve that purpose at a later stage. They were connected with the involuntary or sympathetic nervous system. Man then saw the inner worlds as in the Moon period and the latter part of the Lemurian and Atlantean epochs. Pictures presented themselves quite independent of his will. The sense centres of his desire body were spinning around counterclockwise, following negatively the motion of the earth, which revolves on its axis in that direction, as the sense centres of mediums do to this day. But in most people, these sense centres are inactive, but true development will set them spinning clockwise, as explained elsewhere. This is the difficult feature in the development of positive clairvoyance. The development of mediumship is much easier, because it's merely a revival of the mirror-like function possessed by man in the far past, by which the outside world was involuntarily reflected in him, and which function was afterwards retrained by inbreeding. With present-day mediums, this power is intermittent, which explains why they can sometimes see, and at other times, for no apparent reason, fail utterly. Occasionally, the strong desire of the client enables them to get into touch with the information he's seeking, on which occasions they see correctly, but they're not always honest. Office rent and other expenses must be paid, so when the power, over which they have no conscious control, fails them, some resort to fraud and utter any absurdity that occurs to their minds, in order to satisfy their client and get the money, and thus casting discredit upon what they really do and see at other times. The aspirant to true spiritual sight and insight must first of all give proof of unselfishness, because the trained clairvoyant has no off days. He is not in the least mirror-like, dependent upon the reflections which may happen to come his way. He is able to reach out at any time and go in any direction, and read the thoughts and plans of others, provided he particularly turns his attention that way and not otherwise. The great danger to society which would result from the indiscriminate use of this power, if possessed by an unworthy individual, can be easily understood. Think CIA. He would be able to read the most secret thought. Therefore, the initiate is bound by the most solemn vows never to use this power to serve his individual interest in the slightest degree, nor to save himself a pang. He may feed 5,000 others if he will, but he must not turn a stone into bread to appease his own hunger. He may heal others of palsy and leprosy, but by the law of the universe he is forbidden to staunch his own mortal wounds. Because he is bound by his vow of absolute unselfishness, it's ever true of the initiate that although he saves others, himself he cannot save. So the trained clairvoyant who really has something to give will never hang out a sign offering to exercise his gifts for a fee, but will give and give freely where he considers it consistent with the ripe destiny generated under the law of consequence by the person to be helped. Trained clairvoyance is the kind used for investigating occult facts, and it is the only kind that is of any use for that purpose. So therefore the aspirant must feel not a wish to gratify an idle curiosity, but a holy and unselfish desire to help humanity. Until such a desire exists, no progress can be made in the attainment of positive clairvoyance. In the ages that have passed since the Lemurian epoch, humanity has been gradually building the cerebrospinal nervous system, which is under the control of the will. In the latter part of the Atlantean epoch, this was so far evolved that it became possible for the ego to take full possession of the dense body. That was a time when the point in the vital body came into correspondence with the point at the root of the nose in the dense body, and the indwelling spirit became awake in the physical world, but, so far as the greater part of humanity was concerned, lost consciousness of the inner worlds. Since then, the connection of the pineal gland and the pituitary body with the cerebrospinal nervous system has been slowly building and is all but now complete. To regain contact with the inner worlds, all that remains to be done is the reawakening of the pituitary body and the pineal gland. And when that's accomplished, man will again possess the faculty of perception in the higher worlds, but on a grander scale than formerly, because it will be in connection with the voluntary nervous system and therefore under the control of his will. Through this inner perceptive facility, all avenues of knowledge will be open to him, and he will have at his service a means of acquiring information compared with which all other methods of investigation are but child's play. The awakening of these organs is accomplished by esoteric training, which we will now describe as far as may be done in public. Esoteric training. In the majority of people, the greater part of the sex force, which may be legitimately used through the creative organs, is expended for sense gratification, and therefore in such people there is very little of the ascending current, shown in diagram 17 of this book. When the aspirant to the higher life begins to curb these excesses more and more, to devote his attention to spiritual thoughts and efforts, the trained clairvoyant can perceive the unused sex force commencing to ascend. It surges upwards in a stronger and stronger volume along the path indicated in the diagram, traversing the heart and the larynx, or the spinal cord and the larynx, or both, and then passing directly between the pituitary body and the pineal gland towards the dark point at the root of the nose, where the silent watcher, the highest spirit, has its seat. These currents do not usually take one of the two paths indicated in the diagram, to the entire exclusion of the other, but generally one path is travelled by the greater volume of the sex currents, according to the temperament of the aspirant. In one who is seeking enlightenment along purely intellectual lines, The current travels particularly over the spinal cord, and only a small part goes over the path through the heart. In the mystic, who feels rather than knows, the currents find their way upwards through the heart. Both are developing abnormally, and each must sometime take up the development he has neglected, so as to become fully rounded. Therefore, the Rosicrucians aim to give a teaching that will satisfy both classes, although their main efforts are expended in reaching the intellectually minded, for their need is the greater. This current of itself, however, even though it assumes the proportions of a Niagara and flows until the crack of doom, will be useless. But still, it's not as only a necessary accompaniment, but a prerequisite to self-conscious work in the inner world. It must be cultivated to some extent before the real esoteric training can begin. It will thus be seen that a moral life devoted to spiritual thought must be lived by the aspirant for a certain length of time before it's possible to commence the work that will give him first-hand knowledge of the superphysical realms and enable him to become, in the truest sense, a helper of humanity. When the candidate has lived such a life for a time sufficient to establish the current of spiritual force, and is found worthy and qualified to receive esoteric instruction, he is taught certain exercises to set the Pituitary body in vibration. This vibration causes the body to impinge upon and slightly defect to the nearest line of force. This in turn impinges upon the line next to it, and so the process continues until the force of the vibration has been spent. It is similar to the way in which the striking of one note on a piano will produce a number of overtones by setting up a vibration in the other strings, which are at proper intervals of pitch. When by increased vibration of the pituitary body, the lines of force have been deflected sufficiently to reach the pineal gland, the object has been accomplished. The gap between these two organs has been bridged. This is the bridge between the world of sense and the world of desire. From the time it's built, man becomes clairvoyant and able to direct his gaze where he will. Solid objects are seen both inside and out. To him, space and solidity as hindrances to observation have ceased to exist. He is not yet a trained clairvoyant, but he is a clairvoyant at will, a voluntary clairvoyant. He is a very different faculty from that possessed by the medium, who is usually an involuntary clairvoyant and can see only what comes, or who has, at best, very little more than the purely negative faculty. But the person in whom the bridge is once built is always in sure touch with the inner worlds, the connection being made and broken at will. By degrees, the observer learns to control the vibration of the pituitary body in a manner enabling him to get in touch with any of the regions of the inner worlds which he desires to visit. The faculty is completely under the control of his will. It's not necessary for him to go into a trance or do anything abnormal to raise his consciousness to the desire world. He simply wills to see and sees. As we explained in the earlier part of this work, the neophyte must learn to see in the desire world, or rather, he must learn how to understand what he sees there. In the physical worlds, objects are dense, solid, and do not change in the twinkling of an eye. In the desire world, they change in the most erratic manner. This is a source of endless confusion to the negative involuntary clairvoyant, and even to the neophyte who enters under the guidance of a teacher. But the teaching soon brings the pupil to a point where that form may change as often as it will. He can perceive the life that causes the change and knows it for what it is, despite all possible and puzzling changes. There is also another and more important distinction to be made. The power which enables one to perceive the objects in a world is not identical with the power of entering that world and functioning there. The voluntary clairvoyant though he may have received some training and is able to distinguish the true from the false in the desire world, is in practically the same relation to it as a prisoner behind a barred window is to the outside world. He can see it, but can't function therein. And therefore, esoteric training not only opens up the inner vision of the aspirant, but at the proper time further exercises are given to furnish him with a vehicle in which he can function in the inner worlds in a perfectly self-conscious manner. How the inner vehicle is built. In ordinary life, most people live to eat. They drink, gratify the sex passion in an unrestrained manner, and lose their tempers on the slightest provocation. Though outwardly these people may be very respectable, they are nearly every day of their lives causing almost utter confusion in their organisation. The entire period of sleep is spent by the desire and the vital bodies in repairing the damage done in the daytime, leaving no time for outside work of any kind. But as the individual begins to feel the needs of the higher life, control the sex force and temper, and cultivate a serene disposition, there is less disturbance caused in the vehicles during waking hours, and consequently less time is required to repair the damage during sleep. Thus it becomes possible to leave the dense body for long periods during sleeping hours and function in the inner worlds in the higher vehicles. As the desire body and the mind are not yet organised, they are of no use as separate vehicles of consciousness. Neither can the vital body leave the dense body, as that would cause death. So it's evident that measures must be taken to provide an organised vehicle which is fluidic and so constructed that it will meet the needs of the ego in the inner worlds, as does the dense body in the physical world. The vital body is such an organised vehicle, and if some means could be found to loosen it from the dense body without causing death, the problem would be solved. Besides, the vital body is the seat of memory, and without it, it would be impossible to bring back into our physical consciousness the remembrance of superphysical experiences, and thus obtain the full benefit of them. We remember that the hierophants of the old mystery temples segregated some of the people into castes and tribes, such as the Brahmins and the Levites, for the purpose of providing bodies for use of such egos as were advanced enough to be ready for initiation. This was done in such a manner that the vital body became separable into two parts, as were the desire bodies of all humanity at the beginning of the Earth period. When the hierophant took the pupils out of their bodies, he left one part of the vital body comprising the first and second ethers to perform the purely animal functions, the pupil taking with him a vehicle capable of perception, because of its connection with the sense centres of the dense body, and also capable of memory. It possessed these capabilities because it was composed of the third and fourth ethers, which are the mediums of sense perception and memory. This is in fact that part of the vital body which the aspirant retains from life to life and immortalizes as the intellectual soul. Since Christ came and took away the sin of the world, not of the individual, purifying the desire body of our planet, the connection between all human dense and vital bodies has been loosened to such an extent that by training they are capable of separation as above described. Therefore, initiation is open to all. The finer part of the desire body, which constitutes the emotional soul, is capable of separation in most people. In fact, it possessed that capability even before Christ came. And thus when, by concentration and the use of the proper formula, the finer parts of the vehicles have been segregated for use during sleep or at any other time, the lower parts of the desire and vital bodies are still left to carry on the processes of restoration in the dense vehicle, the mere animal part. That part of the vital body which goes out is highly organised, as we've seen. It's an exact counterpart of the dense body. The desire body and the mind, not being organised, are of use only because they're connected with the highly organised dense body, and when separated from it they are but poor instruments. Therefore man can withdraw from the dense body. The sense centres of the desire body must be awakened. Prior to this, in ordinary life, the ego is inside its bodies and its force is directed outwards. All man's will and energy are bent upon the task of subduing the outside world. At no time is he able to get away from the impressions of his outside environment and thus be free to work on himself in his waking hours. During sleep, when such an opportunity is afforded, because of the dense body having lost consciousness of the world, the ego is outside his bodies. If man is to work on his vehicle at all, it must be when the outside world is shut out, as in sleep, but yet the spirit still remains within and in full control of the faculties, as it is in the waking state. Not until such a state can be attained will it be possible for the spirit to work inwardly and properly sensitize its vehicles. Concentration is such a state, when the senses are stilled, and a person is outwardly in the same condition as in the deepest sleep, yet the spirit remains within and fully conscious. Most people have experienced this state, at least in some degree, when they've become interested in absorption in a book. At such times they live in the scenes depicted by the author and are lost to their environment. When spoken to, they are oblivious to the sound, so to all else transpiring around them, yet they're fully awake to all. To the invisible world created by the author, living there and feeling the heartbeats of all the different characters of the story. They're not independent, but are bound in the life which someone has created for them in a book. The aspirant to the higher life cultivates this faculty of becoming absorbed at will in any subject he chooses, or rather not a subject usually, but a very simple object, which he imagines. And thus when the proper condition or point of absorption has been reached, where his senses are absolutely still, he concentrates his thought upon the different sense centres of the desire body, and they start to revolve. At first the motion is slow and hard to bring about, but by degrees the sense centres of the desire body will make places for themselves within the dense and vital bodies, which learn to accommodate themselves to this new activity. Then some day, when the proper life has developed the requisite cleavage between the higher and lower parts of the vital body, there is a supreme effort of the will. A spiral motion in many directions takes place, and the aspirant stands outside his dense body. He looks at it as another person. The door of this prison house has been opened. He is free to come and go, as much at liberty in the inner worlds as in the physical world, functioning at will in the inner or outer world, a helper of all, desiring his services in any of them. Before the aspirant learns to voluntarily leave the body, he may have worked in the desire body during sleep, for in some people the desire body becomes organised before the separation can be brought about in the vital body. Under those conditions, it is impossible to bring back these subjective experiences to waking consciousness, but generally in such cases it will be noticed as the first sign of development that all confused dreams will cease. Then, after a while, the dreams will become more vivid and perfectly logical. The aspirant will dream of being in places and with people, whether known to him in waking hours or not matters little, conducting himself in as reasonable a way as if he were in the waking state. If the place of which he dreams is accessible to him in waking hours, he may sometimes get proof of the reality of his dream if he will note some physical detail of the scene and verify his nocturnal impression the next day. He'll find that he can, during sleeping hours, visit any place he desires upon the face of the earth and investigate it a great deal more thoroughly than if he had gone there in the dense body, because in his desire body he has access to all places regardless of locks and bars. If he persists, there will at last come a day when he need not wait for sleep to dissolve the connection between his vehicles, but can consciously set himself free. Specific directions for freeing the higher vehicles cannot be given indiscriminately. The separation is brought about by a set formula of words. I'll read that again. The separation is brought about not by a set formula of words, but rather by an act of will. Yet the manner in which the will is directed is individual and can therefore be given only by a competent teacher. Like all other real esoteric information, it's never sold, but comes only as a result of the pupil qualifying himself to receive it. All that can be done here is to give an indication of the first steps which lead up to the acquirement of the faculty of voluntary clairvoyance. The most favourable time to exercise is on first awakening in the morning, before any of the worries and cares of daily life have entered the mind. At that time one is fresh from the inner worlds and therefore more easily brought back into touch with them than at any other time of the day. Do not wait to dress or sit up in bed, but relax the body perfectly and let the exercises be the first waking thought. Relaxation does not mean simply a comfortable position. It's possible to have every muscle tense with expectation, and that of itself frustrates the object. For in that condition the desire body is gripping the muscles. It cannot do otherwise until we calm the mind. Concentration. The first thing to practice is fixing one's thoughts upon some ideal and holding them there without letting them swerve. It's an exceedingly hard task, but to some extent, at least, it must be accomplished before it's possible to make any other progress. Thought is the power we use in making images, pictures, thought forms, according to ideas from within. It's our principal power, and we must learn to have absolute control of it, so that what we produce is not wild illusion induced by outside conditions, but true imagination generated by the spirit from within. Skeptics say that it's all imagination, but as said before, if the inventor had not been able to imagine the telephone, we wouldn't today possess those things. His imaginings were not generally correct or true at first, otherwise the inventions would have worked successfully from the beginning, without the many failures and apparently useless experiments that have nearly always preceded the production of the practical and serviceable instrument or machine. Neither is the imagination of the budding occult scientist correct at first. The only way to make it true is by uninterrupted practice, day after day, exercising his will through the will to keep the thought focused upon one subject, object, or idea, exclusive to all else. Thought is a great power, which we have accustomed to waste. It's been allowed to flow on aimlessly as water flows over a precipice before it's made to turn the wheel. The rays of the sun, diffused over the entire surface of the earth, produce only a moderate warmth, but if even a few of them are concentrated by means of a glass, they are capable of producing fire at the focusing point. Thought force is the most powerful means of obtaining knowledge. If it is concentrated upon a subject, it will burn its way through any obstacle and solve the problem. If the requisite amount of thought force is brought to bear, there is nothing that is beyond the power of human comprehension. So long as we scatter it, thought force is of little use to us, But as soon as we are prepared to take the trouble necessary to harness it, all knowledge is ours. We often hear people exclaim petulantly, "Oh, I cannot think of 100 things at once," when really that is exactly what people have been doing, and what has caused the very trouble of which they complain. People are constantly thinking of 100 things other than the one they have in hand. Every success has been accomplished by a persistent concentration upon the desired end. There is something the aspirant to the higher life must positively learn to do. There is no other way. At first he'll find himself thinking of everything under the sun instead of the ideal upon which he's decided to concentrate. But he must not let that discourage him. In time, he'll find it easier to still his senses and hold his thoughts steady. Persistence, persistence, and persistence will win at last. Without that, however, no results can be expected. It's of no use to perform the exercises for 2 or 3 mornings or weeks, but then neglect them for as long. To be effective, they must be done faithfully every morning without fail. Any subject may be selected according to the temperament and mental persuasion of the aspirant, so long as it's pure and mentally uplifting in its tendency. Christ will do for some. Others who love flowers particularly are most helped by taking one as its subject of concentration. The object matters little, but whatever it is, we must imagine it true to life in all details. If it's Christ, we must imagine a real Christ, with mobile features, life in his eyes, and an expression that is not stony and dead. We must build a living ideal, not a statue. If it's a flower, we must, in imagination, take the seed, and having buried it in the ground, fix our mind upon it steadily. Presently we shall see it burst forth, shooting forth its roots, which penetrate the earth in a spiral manner. From the main branches of the roots, we watch the myriads of minute rootlets as they branch out and ramify in all directions. Then the stem begins to shoot upwards, bursting through the surface of the earth and coming forth as a tiny green stalk. It grows. Presently there is an offset. A tiny twig shoots out from the main stem. It grows, another offset, and a branch appears. From the branches little stalks with buds at the end shoot out, and presently there are a number of leaves. Then comes a bud at the top. It grows larger until it begins to burst, and the red leaves of the rose show beneath the green. It unfolds in the air, emitting an exquisite perfume, which we sense perfectly as it's wafted up to us on the balmy summer breeze, which gently sways the beautiful creation before the mind's eye. Only when we imagine in such clear and complete outlines as these do we enter into the spirit of concentration. There must be no shadowy, faint resemblance. Those who have travelled in India have told of the fakirs showing them a seed which was planted and grew before the eyes of the astonished witness, bearing fruit which the traveller tasted. That was done by concentration so intense that the picture was visible not only to the fakir himself, but also to the spectators. A case is recorded where the members of a committee of scientists all saw the wonderful things done before their eyes, under conditions where the sleight of hand was impossible. Yet the photographs which they obtained while the experiment was in progress came to naught. There was no impression on the sensitive plates, because there had been no material concrete objects. At first, the pictures which the aspirant builds will be but shadowy and poor likenesses, but in the end he can, by concentration, conjure up the image more real and alive than things in the world. When the aspirant has become able to form such pictures and has succeeded in holding his mind upon the picture thus created, he may try to drop the picture suddenly and, holding his mind steady without any thought, wait to see what comes into that vacuum. For a long time nothing may appear, and the aspirant must carefully guard against making visions for himself. But if he keeps on faithfully and patiently every morning, there'll come a time when, the moment he has let the imaged picture drop, in a flash the surrounding desire world will open up to his inner eye. At first it may be but a mere glimpse, but it's an earnest of what will come later at will. Meditation. When the aspirant has practiced concentration for some time, focusing the mind upon some simple object, building a living thought form by means of the imaginative faculty, he will, by means of meditation, learn all about the object thus created. Supposing that the aspirant has, by concentration, called up the image of the Christ, it's very easy to meditatively recall the incidents of his life, suffering and resurrection, but much beyond that can be learned by meditation. Knowledge never before dreamed of will flood the soul with glorious light. Yet something that's uninteresting and does not of itself suggest anything marvellous is better for practice. Try to find out all about, say, a match or a common table. When the image of the table has been clearly formed in the mind, think what kind of wood it is and whence it came. Go back to the time when, as a tiny seed, the tree from which the wood was cut first fell into the forest soil. Watch it grow from year to year, covered by the snows of winter and warmed by the summer. Steadily growing upward, its roots meanwhile constantly spreading under the ground, and first it's a tender sapling swaying in the breeze, then as a young tree it gradually stretches higher and higher towards the air and the sunshine. As the years pass, its girth becomes greater and greater, until at last, one day, the logger comes with his axe and I'll read that again. As the years pass, its girth becomes greater and greater, until at last one day the logger comes with his axe and saw, gleaming as they reflect the rays of the winter sun. Our tree is felled and shorn off its branches, leaving but the trunk, that's cut into logs, which are hauled over the frozen roads to the river bank, and there to await the springtime, when the melting snow swells the streams. A great raft of the logs is made, the pieces of our tree being among them. We know every little peculiarity about them and would recognise them instantly among thousands. So clearly have we marked them in our minds. We follow the raft down the stream, noting the passing landscape, and become familiar with the men who have the care of the raft and who sleep upon little huts built upon their floating charge. At last we see it arrive at a sawmill and disbanded. One by one the logs are grasped by prongs on an endless chain and hauled out of the water. Here comes one of our logs, the widest part of which will be made into the top of our table. It's hauled out of the water to the log deck and rolled along by men with peavies. We hear the hungry whine of the great circular saws as they revolve so fast that they appear as mere blurs before our eyes. Our log is placed on a carriage which is propelled towards one of them, and in a moment those teeth of steel are tearing their way through its body and dividing it into boards and planks. Some of the wood is selected to form part of a building, but the best of it is taken to a furniture factory and put into a kiln where it's dried by steam, so that it won't shrink after it's been made into furniture. Then it's taken out and put through a great planing machine with many sharp knives, which makes it smooth. Next it's sawn off into different lengths and glued together to form tabletops. The legs are turned from thicker pieces and set into the frame which supports the top. Then the whole article is smoothed again with sandpaper, varnished and polished, and thus completing the table in every respect. It's next sent out with other furniture to the store where we bought it, and we follow it as it's carted from that place to our home and left in our dining room. Thus, by meditation, we've become conversant with the various branches of industry necessary to convert a forest tree into a piece of furniture. We have seen all the machines and the men, noted the peculiarities of the various places. We have even followed the life process whereby that tree has grown from a tiny seed, and have learned that back of seemingly very commonplace things there is a great and absorbingly interesting history. A pin, the match with which we light the gas itself, and the room in which that gas is burned all have interesting histories, well worth learning. Observation. One of the most important aids to the aspirant is his efforts in observation. Most people go through life blindfolded. Of them it is literally true that they have eyes and see not, have ears and hear not. Upon the part of the majority of humanity there is a deplorable lack of observation. Most people are to some extent excusable for this because their sight is not normal. Urban life has caused untold damage to the eyes. In the country, the child learns to use the muscles of the eye to full extent, relaxing or contracting them as required to see objects at considerable distances in the open or close at hand in and about the house. But the city-bred child sees practically everything close at hand, and the muscles of its eyes are seldom used to observe objects at any great distance, and therefore that faculty is to a great extent lost. And this results in a prevalence of nearsightedness and other eye troubles. It's important to one aspiring to the high life that he be able to see all things about him in clear, definite outlines and in full detail. To one suffering from defective sight, the use of glasses is like opening up a new world. Instead of the former mistiness, everything is seen clearly and distinctly. If the condition of the sight requires the use of two foci, one should not be content with having two pairs of glasses, one for near and one for far, thus necessitating frequent changes. Not only are the changes wearisome, but one is very apt to forget one pair when leaving home. The two foci can be had in one pair of bifocal glasses and should be worn to facilitate observation of the minutest details. Discrimination. When the aspirant has attended to his eyesight, he should systematically observe everything and everybody, drawing conclusions from actions to cultivate the faculty of logical reasoning. Logic is the best teacher in the world, as well as the safest and surest guide in any world. While practicing this method of observation, it should always be kept in mind that it must be used only to gather facts and not for the purposes of criticism, at least not wanton criticism. Constructive criticism, which points out defects and the means of remedying them, is the basis of progress, but destructive criticism, which vandalistically demolishes good and bad alike without aiming at any higher attainment, is an ulcer on the character and must be eradicated. Gossip and idle tale-bearing are clogs and hindrances, while it is not required that we shall say that black is white and overlook manifestly wrong conduct. Criticism should be made for the purposes of helping, not to wantonly besmirch the character of a fellow being because we found a little stain. Remember the parable of the mote and the beam. We should turn our most unsparing criticism towards ourselves. None is so perfect that there is no room for improvement. The more blameless the man, the less prone he is to find fault and cast the first stone at another. If we point out faults and suggest ways for improvement, it must be done without personal feeling. We must always seek the good which is hidden in everything. The cultivation of this attitude of discrimination is particularly important when the aspirant to first-hand knowledge has practiced concentration and meditation exercises for some time and has become fairly proficient in them. There is still a higher step to be taken. We've seen that concentration is focusing thought upon a single object. It's the means whereby we build a clear, objective and living image of the form about which we wish to acquire knowledge. Meditation is the exercise whereby the history of the object of our investigation is traced and, so to say, entered into, to pick out of it every shred of evidence as to its relation to the world in general. These two mental exercises deal in the deepest and most thorough manner imaginable with things. They lead up to a higher, deeper and more subtle stage of mental development, which deals with the very soul of things. The name of that stage is Contemplation. Contemplation. In contemplation, there is no reaching out in thought or imagination for the sake of getting information, as was the case in meditation. It's simply the holding of the object before our mental vision and letting the soul of it speak to us. We repose quietly and relaxed upon a couch or bed, not negatively, but thoroughly on the alert, watching for the information that will surely come if we've reached the proper development. Then the form of the object seems to vanish and we see only the life at work. Contemplation will teach us about the life side, as meditation taught us about the form side. When we reach this stage and have before us a tree in the forest, we lose sight of the form entirely and see only the life, which is in this case a group spirit. We will find, to our astonishment, that the group spirit of the tree includes the various insects which feed upon it, and that the parasite and its host are emanations from one and the same group spirit. For the higher we ascend in the invisible realms, the fewer the separate and distinct forms, and the more completely the one life predominates, impressing upon the investigator the supreme fact that there is but the one life, the universal life of God, in whom it's an actual fact that we live and move and have our being. Mineral, plant, animal and man, all, without exception, are manifestations of God, and this fact furnishes the true basis of brotherhood, a brotherhood which includes everything from the atom to the sun, because all are emanations from God. Conceptions of brotherhood, based upon any other foundations such as class distinctions, race affinity, similarity of occupation, etc., fall far short of this true basis, as the occult scientist clearly realizes when he sees the universal life flowing in all that exists. Adoration. When this height has been reached by contemplation, and the aspirant has realized that he is truth, beholding God in life that permeates all things, there remains still to be taken the highest step, adoration, whereby he unites himself with the source of all things, reaching by that act the highest goal possible of attainment by man, until the time when the permanent union takes place at the end of the great day of manifestation. It's the writer's opinion that neither the heights of contemplation nor the final step of adoration can be attained without the aid of a teacher. The aspirant need never fear, however, that for want of a teacher he will be delayed in taking these steps, nor need to be concerned about looking for a teacher. All that is necessary for him to do is start to improve himself, and to earnestly and persistently continue therein. In that way he will purify his vehicles. They'll commence to shine in the inner worlds, and cannot fail to attract the attention of teachers, who are always watching for just cases, and are more than eager and glad to help those who, because of their earnest efforts to purify, have won the right to receive help. Humanity is sorely in need of helpers who are able to work from the inner worlds. Therefore seek, and ye shall find. But let us not imagine that by going about from one professed teacher to another, we are seeking. Seeking in that sense of the word will avail nothing in this dark world. We ourselves must kindle the light which invariably radiates from the vehicles of the earnest aspirant. That is the star that will lead us to the teacher, or rather the teacher to us. The time required to bring results from the performance of the exercises varies with each individual and is dependent upon his application, his stage in evolution, and his record in the Book of Destiny. Therefore, no general time can be set. Some who are almost ready obtain results in a few days or weeks. Others have to work months, years, and even their whole life without visible results. Yet the results will be there, and the aspirant who faithfully persists will one day, in this life or a future life, behold his patience and faithfulness rewarded, and the inner worlds open to his gaze, finding himself a citizen of realms where the opportunities are immeasurably greater than in the physical world only. From that time, awake or asleep, through what men call life, and through what men call death, his consciousness will be unbroken. He will lead a consciously continuous existence, having the benefit of all the conditions which make for more rapid advancement to every higher position of trust to be used in the uplifting of the race. Okay, thank you very much. That concludes chapter 17 of Max Heindel's Rosicrucian Cosmo Conception. Some very interesting activities there for you to study. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much, and I'll see you for chapter 18.